Hey, I'm Matt, and this is my friend Aron from North Dakota. We have met halfway between our respective houses in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which is like North Dakota, but with less oil and more presidents carved into rocks. Is that
basically that's
fair?
Yeah,
I don't know much
close.
about the Dakotas. Yeah. So we're at the Blackstone Inn in Leeds, South Dakota, taking an entire day to talk about the book of Ephesians, and this is a discussion that we're going to have about Ephesians chapter 2. We've done one about Ephesians chapter 1, and then a big, long, gigantic discussion about Ephesus and the whole thing and all that. And I think they were both really fun. So if you haven't caught those,
fun for us.
Please go do so. And yeah,
hopefully it's fun for somebody else too.
Come on, like our moms are going to watch this. I think my mom might make a couple extra accounts under different names so that I feel affirmed and like people are paying attention to what I'm doing.
My mom's going to put patience past the first 10 minutes, but she loves me anyway.
For that. Yeah. It's nice. No, I'm sure she does. Would never question that.
Yeah.
So, Ephesians chapter 2, here we go. We, in talking about Ephesians 1, what was your big picture read on the thing? Where did we leave it?
So, Ephesians 1, he's painting out the scope. Paul, celebrating that God has a plan from beginning to end to bring all things to glorify Him in Christ. This huge story, all woven together. But in that he says, you have been blessed and you've been brought in, you've been adopted into this story. And so, like you pointed out, the natural question is, how'd that happen?
Okay, so we've got this story, or that Paul is excited about the great forethought and effort that God put into bringing people to Him. And that's a pretty staggering difference from where people were.
Right.
And so then chapter 2 is going to give us a sense of how that happened and what that means.
Right.
Okay, same page?
Yep.
Hey, look at that.
So
we agree on some
chapter 2, he says, you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived. So he says, you were dead in the way that you walked and the way that you lived. So he's talking about something more than being like, well, before you were born or reincarnation or something crazy, right? He's saying, in the way that you lived before you were a Christian, it was as though you were dead. You were dead to God, and you were following the prince of the power of the air, which is a convoluted way, and I won't go into all the assumptions there, but what he's saying is, he's talking about Satan. We followed Satan. We didn't think we were.
So he's talking about like a literal evil, not a personification of evil, but you'd read that as like a literal, actual being who has bad things in mind and wants to thwart the work of God.
Yes.
Okay.
So what's interesting is so none of us would think, oh, well, I'm serving Satan. Maybe there's a few that do, right? Do it intentionally. But most of us, well, I'm not serving Satan. The thing is that in our rebellion against God, we think we're being independent, but we're actually not.
Okay.
We're serving Satan in a way that serves his purpose, even though we think we're serving ourselves.
So this language is pretty. I mean, my brother, I was funny, and he knew he was being funny. But even when he was little, if he asked questions about stuff that happened before he was born, he'd always say like, "Mom, back when I was still dead, what was it like?" It is, you got to laugh like a quarter of the time. So he kept going with it forever. But I mean, this is pretty stark language. I mean, this is stark. You were completely shot. You had nothing cooking, no hope, no prospects, nothing to look forward to, and that I get that theologically based on what we just looked at in the last chapter, but I think that's kind of hard to picture because it doesn't feel like it. Like, I don't know if you have a job or family or...
So he's speaking spiritually.
Youth or...
Right.
Okay, so how does that work?
So you were dead, and but he picks up the thought. This will help make it sense. Okay, so if you flip over to chapter 4, you were dead, and you did all these things, and you were a follower of Satan, even though you didn't know it, and you were an object of wrath. Well, that's bad. But God, in verse 4, being rich in mercy, describes the motivation, describes his attributes, because of the great love with which he loved us, again, describes the motivation, made us alive together with Christ. So when we're before Christ, we're still moral beings, because we were worthy of judgment. We're objects of wrath. Okay? So we're making free choices. We're on the path of experiencing, or we'll eventually experience the consequences of those choices. We're free moral agents, but we're doing it in a way that we think we're individuals, but we're serving Satan towards his end. And he describes that reality as death. And they're just separated from God. Okay? So physically, our heart is pumping, our lungs are breathing, but we're separated from life. And he says, but God made us alive even when we were dead. He made us alive together with Christ. So moving from death to life, and the emphasis there is on who's the actor, God. So we talked in the last episode, chapter 1, about election. We got off on this big long thing. We won't go there again. But one of the reasons that election is necessary is because if God just left it to who would choose him, no one would, because no one's capable of it.
I think there'd be a lot of people who would argue with you on that. Would say, wait, are you kidding me? Like, I don't believe in election, and I chose to follow God.
You can say you don't believe in election, that's fine, but the only way, according to Paul in Ephesians 2, the only way anyone comes to God is if God changes their nature and gives them the ability to do so. So you might not realize that's how it took place. That doesn't change the fact that that's so. So would God work through, let's say, 20th century revivalist preaching free will at the tent meeting?
Your Billy Sunday type.
Billy Sunday type, right? Would God work through them to bring saving faith? Sure he would. God works through flawed human agents. That's the only human agents he has to work through. I mean, other than the human, divine Son of God. But I mean, other than that, I mean,
sure.
Of course God works through humans. So just because, I don't believe that's how it happened. That's not how I came to faith. Well, we might not realize it, but that's the picture that Paul paints. And so he's saying, your question to lead into chapter 2 is, well, how did I get to be part of this story? He says, well, let me tell you, it's more amazing than you can know.
People are already on their way to their keyboards right now.
Sure.
To fix you.
Sure.
Because of how wrong and dumb you are. So you just need to know that. It's going to get weird. Somebody's going to say something, like it's going to be fun, and I'll just let I'll let you monitor the comment section on this one and on the last one.
Respond in perfect Christian charity to everyone.
Absolutely,
right?
And I'm sure as the caretaker of the comment section, I will be finger on the delete button.
That's fine.
You're making sense. I think this is a lot of this stuff I think you can intuit your way to or reason your way to based on your own experiences. And this is one of those places, and I think this is why there's such a friction over the predestination free will thing, where your senses fail.
Yes.
I feel free.
Yes.
I really feel free.
Yes.
I feel like I picked someone who I thought was beautiful and interesting and who I wanted to spend my life with, and that I pursued her, and then she picked me back. I feel like we chose to have kids when we were ready to have kids, and we had wonderful kids. I feel like I chose a job to have. I feel like I chose an education I wanted. I feel like I chose to meet you here and make videos. And, well, at least from my human perspective, I feel like I chose to be a Christian. I can remember when I chose it. I can remember making that decision.
I can as well.
And yet what you're saying this says is that is an illusion?
I wouldn't say an illusion. Okay, so I'll unpack this briefly again, like I did on chapter 1. So Acts 17, Paul's preaching to the Athenian philosophers, and he's describing God in language that they'll understand. He says, in Him we live and move and have our being. So we are, all of us. He's speaking to non-believing pagan philosophers there. In Him we live and move and have our being. We don't exist outside of God. So when we think of this thing, it's like a tug of war between two different parties, but the parties are not equal. And that's the wrong analogy.
That does throw the whole thing off.
So
you're right.
The better way to think of it is like a flowchart where we are in God. So we're free in Him, and our choices are real. But even in our freedom, we're doing exactly what He ordained to do. And again, I use the example of Satan thinking he was killing Jesus and exactly falling into God's plan.
But we're back to the stalemate that's always going to happen when people debate this. I mean, you're going to find a spin to put on a text like this to be able to say it's limited in how far this election goes or whatnot, and that we have this experience. And so this is what I want to get to, since we've already gone deeply down this road in chapter 2, is, again, whether you view all this free will determinism thing this way or this way, the language is still very distinct. You were dead and hopeless. However you want to interpret the language dead in your situation. Now, I'm going to interpret that, regardless of what I might think about the teachings of John Calvin, as being, I had no play.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the game.
Right.
I did not have agency. I could not proactively affect my destiny. It was broken. And if that's how I understand dead, and that is how I understand dead, then that lends a lot of credence to your read on election is necessary to rightly understand this in chapter 2.
Yes.
But I think we can start to put the election question in the rearview mirror, lean on that language of we are products of great forethought and effort on the part of God.
Yeah, we don't need to keep
let people read into it however they want. But the thing to take from this is, I mean, this is as 180 as a 180 gets.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And so it's not then.
Well,
it's not then that what we're being taught here is that God tidied up something that was already like pretty good, but just needed like that extra special boost of godness to get over the hump to like really good.
No.
To like into where like the best version of you.
Right.
This is completely dead, a functional zero, to completely alive, and if we go back to chapter 1, like a child of God, and one that's in good standing, one that's going to inherit the stuff, an heir. So it seems like, as I go through chapter 2, especially the first half, it seems like all of it is kind of this: you were this, then this. There's this contrast with this, and that's the play throughout. And I think that's all trying to just communicate the helplessness of our situation, and how much more meaningful it is that God did the heavy lifting versus what it would be if it were a story of human triumph, like the Olympics, overcoming the odds to beat another powerful human challenger at a thing. This is, instead of being a story of human triumph in the human spirit, this is an even bigger story. It's the story of God's triumph, and how we, who theoretically should not have got to play a role in that story at all, really play a pretty important role.
Yeah. Well, there was a band in the 90s, Burlap to Cashmere. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I like the image, but that's not even enough.
Oh, just the name of the band.
Yeah.
That
image of, rags to riches, it wasn't even rags. It wasn't even good enough to be called rags. It was death. Death to life. Like you said, you can't get a bigger 180.
Yeah. So here's the thing that keeps me coming back to the whole Christian thing in general. And you know this, I've talked about it a little bit. I feel like I have been tiptoes to the edge of atheism maybe twice in my life.
Okay.
Once in college and once after an unfortunate church experience. And I'm not one of those people who has a really just sentimental Hallmark Hall of Fame kind of epiphany story where everything came into focus. I kind of wish my faith was like that, because I respect and admire people who have that, but I don't. I'm here because it makes sense to me, and I've re-upped because it makes sense to me, and I backed away from the precipice of atheism because it makes sense to me. In my little mind, if there is an infinite being that made everything, a first cause, and I think there is, and there are finite beings that have value, us, and I think there are because, we're hanging out and I see people around, then the only thing I can think of that would motivate an infinite being who can have whatever that infinite being wants to redeem or care for a finite being would be love. It would be grace. Because what other motivation could there be? Well, I need more people. Well, then will more into existence. You're an infinite being. You can do whatever you want. Well, I need more angels and their voices in my choir. Then make more angels. Well, I need somebody to go and tell. Well, then make someone go and tell. But if there is to be redemption, what that says to me is there is value in that which is being redeemed. That who is doing the redeeming sees in that which is being redeemed. Yes. And so I haven't signed up for any other religions because for all of Christianity's quirks and historical weirdness and all the silly things that have happened in church,
only a few.
All of that, you got Ephesians 2, and you got this language about, but because of his great love for us, God, who's rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. It is by grace you've been saved. And it flips it around and says it again in the super famous verse 8, for it's by grace you've been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works so that no one can boast. That to me, like this is why I'm in. That adds up to me.
Yeah.
If there is hope for humanity, and if there is a maker who is the one that can deliver that hope, that's got to be the motivation, and I don't see that in other religions. Yep. I see very finite, cheap gods who need things from people, things they can't give themselves. So they need people to do that, or they need people to say that, or they need people to win something for them in this game of chess they're playing cosmically with other rival deities. That doesn't add up to me. That to me feels like the stuff of movies and fairy tales. But a perfect being reaching out to finite beings, motivated by love and grace, that checks out. So this verse is important to me.
And I say there, you were dead, God made you alive, and he says in 5, but you were dead, verse 1, you were dead, bunch of parenthetical stuff, verse 4, but God made you alive, and it's by grace you've been saved. That's grace. You're a total passive recipient, God intervening, God doing this thing. And you're right, it's totally unique in all the religions of the world.
Does that sound like a pretty crappy version of faith, though? To just be like, here's my little formula in my brain, and this is why I'm a Christian?
I think it's good.
That still counts?
It counts.
Think I can still make YouTube videos? I mean, it says worst Christian ever on the thing. Like, so the best Christian ever would have a really good rationale for why they're in. So
I think it's a great rush. I mean, that's however we say it, artfully or clunky. That's the heart of it. And anybody that's thought long and hard about it, that's it. This is radically different from anything else. I mean, I know me, and I'm flawed, and salvation cannot come from within me. It has to come from outside of me. And that's at the center of it. You've got to start there, or it doesn't work.
I feel like this is the central principle of Christianity. And there's a rabbit trail I really want to go down. I'll hit it quickly. I feel like this is our trademark. This is the thing that we were given by God. This is the thing we're supposed to give away. And part of my frustration with where Christianity is at right now, and part of what I'm trying to figure out for myself, not that I have figured out and I'm trying to explain to everyone else, that I am trying to figure out for myself, is what does it look like in this society, in this brand of democracy, to really make grace our trademark? And grace and control, they don't match up very well.
They don't go together.
They're not compatible. And I feel like we have tried to do the grace thing as like it's a message, it's the hook. This is like you accept this concept intellectually of grace, and then you're signed up for Team Christian. And I feel like we're good at being gracious toward people we like and who see the world the same way and agree.
Yeah, sometimes not.
Because fair. What I feel like we're not knocking out of the park, and by we I mean we, not just everybody else is wrong and I'm the genius who's getting it right. What we're not doing as well at is actually making this our mantra. This is our thing. You might get a whole different list of preferences or convictions out of this Christian or that Christian, but you're always going to get grace, because grace is the founding principle of our relationship with our Maker and what we're articulating and trying to advocate and live out for other people. And I think we do it okay in church, but I don't think we've figured out how to do the grace thing in a pluralistic society with a bunch of people who don't think like us and don't live like us. And so in the absence of knowing how to deal with all that difference, I think we've just resorted to what humans always resort to, which is have more guns or have more swords,
or more power,
and force them to do it in a way that works for us.
I think the problem there is that our thinking isn't shaped by theology, it's shaped by the culture. We don't know. It's just thinking in terms of power games, which, like you said, humans have always done.
Which seems completely acceptable and normal when you talk politics. It just is completely unacceptable and not normal when you're talking about faith.
Yeah, it's not a deficiency of theology. It's a deficiency of having your theology fully integrated into everything.
Yeah.
And
so am I a Christian who does like politics and lives in the world, or am I a person who lives in the world and does politics, and then also am a Christian? I do think the order there really shapes how you think about especially people who are different from you in culture. And I would never try to redefine the word grace as agree with things you don't agree with in the interest of niceness. I'd just say you give up your right to dictate things to people, and you instead show like just basic compassion and human decency back and forth as you try to work through whatever this stuff is.
For what you just said, I can take you right to the text and give you biblical support for that. It's because you were dead and God made you alive. And it's because they're dead and God needs to make them alive. Or maybe they were dead and God's made them alive. Anyway, the point is, we all start at the same starting point. We can't look at somebody else and say, oh, well, they need grace. Well, they're sure lost. We have to look at ourselves and say, wow, was I lost? We're all at that same starting point. And if you can view people not just as the image of God, but also as people in need of grace, like me, then we go at it all differently. That would shape. If we could do that, that would solve a lot of problems. So anyway,
yeah. The verse 10, which comes on the back end of this super famous stuff. It's fair game. You guys can just knock yourselves out.
Sorry.
No, we're just going to take up this corner.
Yeah, we're all right. You're good.
We're hogging it. I apologize. Verse 10 is kind of the end of this super famous thought. It says, "For we're God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." And so now we're back into this whole theme that's been developing through these 2 chapters, that
You have a part to play.
You are a product of great forethought and great effort, and it's for a reason. Because you are an agent of this kingdom. You are an heir. You are a child. You have a role to play, a child of God.
Yep.
So here's what that role might look like. And we're inching toward getting some answers, but I can still see the reader being like, okay, so what is it? What do I do? What do I do? Paul's got a little ways to go before he gets in there. So give me the lightning version of what you see happening in the second half of Ephesians 2.
Okay, so the second half of Ephesians 2 takes, so he says, you were dead, and God made you alive, and he made you an agent of this kingdom, and he's got things planned for you, and he says, therefore, you people who are Gentiles, or people who were not part of the Jewish ethnicity or faith community, you've been brought into this story. He says, but don't worry, you're not like second-class citizens, because I've taken Jews and Gentiles, and you're no longer at odds. And it's hard for us to imagine how that was today. I mean, it might be akin to the way Muslims are integrating into Western societies today. It's just they keep to themselves. They eat different, very different philosophical assumptions about life. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal for Jews and Gentiles. They didn't eat together. They didn't do things together. And he says, but don't worry.
This dividing wall of hostility.
This dividing wall of hostility. And what's interesting is there that God's law, what he's talking about there, the dividing wall is the Old Testament law. the thing that made the Jews separate.
Yeah, yes, he's talking about that, but people also would have thought of that in terms of all the other stuff culturally that had been added on.
Yes.
Yeah, so this would have conjured two thoughts for most of the audience.
But what he's saying there is this thing that God intended to bring life through human sin brought division.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, and I've demolished that law in the sacrifice of Christ, and now you are one people. You are one new humanity under the name of Christ.
Feels like Hebrews 8, 9, one of those. But the same concept. It's just it's new covenant stuff, right? We don't need to hit that up. It's new covenant stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a dual function here. I see it the same way, that these cultural barriers that everybody would have pictured. I mean, he hits on the uncircumcised, circumcised thing. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an issue that's flaring up all over Acts, Ephesians, the whole? Mm-hmm. This is not an entirely smooth transition from the we're Jews who believe in Jesus to this is for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of process to it that we could take a ton of time getting into. But this cultural division is broken down, and this is something that Paul's saying we aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for this to be here anymore. We can just drop it now, guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
The spiritual division, it's obliterated in Christ, as you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty exciting as well. But this is also saying that all of this is for a purpose, that God has built this new people, for these purposes. So in 1, we see the hint that you are on purpose for a purpose. In 2, we see it much more clearly stated that you as an individual were this, and now you're this, for a purpose. And now in the second half of chapter 2, we're seeing collectively, that's happened in a whole bunch of different people's lives. And now we got this one people who were made for this purpose. It's intrinsically good that you are saved, but you're saved for good works you were prepared in advance to do. So there's a purposefulness to it.
Yes.
Not just now we can breathe easy. Mm-hmm. That worked out, thank goodness. Which I think is brilliant, because how boring would it be if the whole point of a religion was just like get one epiphany, like say some stuff, and then now you're in.
Mm-hmm. And go move on to your happy middle class life.
Yeah.
Funny, that's how a lot of people understand it.
Christianity, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more than that.
But the rub about this thing is that there is more to it.
Yeah, there is.
And I think that's kind of the cool surprise to the whole thing.
It's the beginning point, not the end point.
Is that the purpose and the direction question that everybody's asking. Ephesians chapter 2 is speaking to that. I used to feel really jealous of when I was in those formative years as a young guy watching the Lord of the Rings shows.
Mm-hmm.
And what a weird response this was, but I watched that and I was like, man, I wish I was like Frodo. Somebody would just show up and be like, here's your job, dude. You take the thing, and you go to the thing, and you just put it in the thing. That's why you are you. And then you can get on a boat and just sail somewhere and just sit there forever and do nothing. Take the thing, put it in the thing. And because I craved just clarity on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I asked the same questions everybody asks. Why am I here? What am I doing? I just seriously blow another entire night on video games, stuff like that. And I think this passage is exciting because it doesn't linger long in now you're not dead anymore. Soak that in. It instead gets right on to
there was
now
a purpose
it gets
for this.
good.
There was intention behind this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, here's why you're here.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting.
Mm-hmm. It is exciting. It should, I think that's why Paul begins the way he does with, blessed be God who has done all this stuff, and wait till I start to tell you about all he's done.
Yeah, he's hyped too.
He's just, he's amped.
So, we're going to hit pause there. Pick it up in chapter 3, which is a really curious one. I'm interested to see where this conversation goes because there's some interesting stuff happening in the way that Paul says it. This is Aron Utecht. Website again?
ibcbeulah.com.
ibcbeulah.com. And my name's Matt, and I got the YouTube channel that you're watching this on. If you like it, subscribe. If you like what Aron's doing, or I should say rather, you will like what Aron's doing because he's smart and it's good stuff, and go check out his sermons over there, including stuff on the book of Ephesians, which he's working on right now. We're at the Blackstone Inn in Leeds, South Dakota. They've been kind enough to host us, so if for some reason you're ever passing through Leeds, South Dakota, make sure to take care of them as well and leave a nice review. Okay, I'm Matt. We're done for now. See you in chapter 3.